Okay. It's fine. Good morning, everyone. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. If you have questions, just add them to the comment area, and if I have time before 10 a.m., I'll get to them. It'll just be a few moments. Doing some final check-in. Looks like people are joining. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's 9:03 a.m., so let's go ahead and get started. My name's Larry Klein. I'm mayor for the city of Sunnyvale, and welcome to the third installment of my virtual office hours. People have said that they really appreciate these weekly addresses, so it looks like I'll be continuing them until at least the pandemic is over. And so let's see how long that is. Keep your fingers crossed that it'll be sooner rather than later. But people seem to like a summary info of the information that I'm passing on, of what's happened over the last week, and a chance for them to ask questions and then, basically get general comments. It's been very positive from my standpoint that I've actually been able to connect to a lot more people than I normally do in my office hours. Over 2 or 3 hours, I'll meet, 15, 8 to 15 people, depending upon how many people show up. But this has actually been very good to get the message out about, especially what the city's doing. So let's see. And I know to start off with, this is a very difficult time for everyone. Our lives have changed very, very rapidly, and that can cause, basically everyone a lot of stress. Things aren't the way they used to be, and there isn't really an end in sight. This is a very unique emergency from a city standpoint. Most emergencies we see, we have a definite timeline. Right now, we're in an ever-changing situation, and while you're sheltering in place, please remember to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. It's really important. Take care of your family, take care of your neighbors, but also make sure that you're doing okay. Also, so during this time, it's important to continue to follow the important orders that will help flatten the curve of the virus. Remember, you can do your part to stop the spread of the virus by just a few things. First, sheltering in place, reducing the number of people that you're coming in contact with on a daily basis is really important. Washing your hands. I know people are tired of hearing about it, but it is very, very important to help stop the spread of the virus. Don't touch your face, maintain good social distancing if you have to go out, and only go out for essential items. It's important that, from a mental standpoint, that if you need to go for a walk, go for, a bike ride, maintaining social distance from everyone else in the community. But, it is also important that you, take a break, go to your backyard, get out of sheltering in place for just a moment, because, this is the new normal for an unknown period of time, at least the way things are right now. And we definitely have some good news. It looks like from the numbers, the Bay Area, we might be actually flattening that curve. The information, we're only, a few weeks into this so far, but it looks like, what we've done has actually been helpful. So thank you. Your actions are saving lives. Your actions are stopping or slowing down the spread of COVID-19, and that's really important. But we're not out of the woods yet. Remember, you could still be a carrier of the virus if you're not showing any symptoms. So you do need to make sure that social distancing is always there. And, please be careful when you're visiting others. If you're visiting people at risk, take appropriate precautions, but make sure that you're maintaining that social distancing, you're being as safe as possible. So it's been another busy week. Welcome to April. We know we are now about 17 days. It seems like a lot more, but it's only 17 days after the March 16th public health order from the 6 counties to shelter in place. And that was, that it's only over 2 weeks, but I hear from a lot of people it seems like a month easily. But things are changing dramatically, and since that declaration, a lot's happened, and we talked last week, and so you can go back to that video if you want about what had happened in the previous week. But more seems to be happening every day. There are press conferences, there are conference calls with the federal, state, and county level administration on a daily basis. So, I have been pulled into a lot of things, not just focused, just on, dealing with the city manager, city staff, different people within our community that are reaching out, but trying to stay up to date on what's happening, what measures are being taken at the county level, at the state level. It's also giving feedback or advocating for what we need, from a Sunnyvale standpoint. So let's kind of go through, some of that. The big thing this week was Tuesday midday. There was another Santa Clara County press conference on changes to the order from the Santa Clara County. So the order for our shelter in place was updated, and Dr. Sarah Cody, the Santa Clara County's public health officer, she's been doing a fantastic job. She's demonstrated a lot of courage and leadership by joining that first order, and has basically kind of shown a very positive influence in our community and making some hard decisions. It's like, it's not easy telling people to stay in their homes, and I've been very impressed with her and her whole team, and then the updates that we're getting on basically every other day, to make sure that we're up to date on what's happening as far as testing is concerned, as far as other measures that are going into place. So on Tuesday, the new order adds some clarifying language around what are essential business activities, as well as some new directives. So the biggest thing is I want to focus on the new directives. One of the things that the county did was basically prohibit the use of playgrounds, dog parks, public picnic areas, similar recreational areas. Sunnyvale had already put that in place for playgrounds previously, because maintaining safe social distancing with kids, as well as the possible contact of the virus on playground equipment, was seen as an issue very early on. So we had prohibited, shut down the playgrounds about a week and a half ago now. But what the county order does is shut down pretty much all equipment like that, including basketball courts, tennis courts, anything that would have been open to the public is now closed. Parks are still open. You're still allowed to walk around your local park, but from that standpoint, the playgrounds and a lot of the equipment, the exercise equipment, will now be considered off limits. The other thing was, the shared recreational facilities, fully, golf courses, tennis, basketball courts, pools, those facilities are now closed for recreational use, because the concept of they can't be cleaned down. It's the contact that people do, conceivably spreading the virus and someone coming in after you. So those have been closed down. And then the order required essential businesses to develop a social distancing protocol by today. So that protocol puts in line what their employees are doing, and also publicizes what their customers are doing, if it's like a restaurant, as far as what the standard order is, whether or not that's spacing inside the restaurant when people are coming to do takeout, or whether or not it's hand sanitizer at the door, all those sorts of things. So I've seen a lot of different things when I've been out in the community picking up lunch over the last 2 weeks. The latest order also prohibited most construction. So previously residential construction was allowed to go on, and now it's prohibiting both residential and commercial construction unless that residential construction has more than 10% affordable housing. So the affordable housing or those projects that at least had 10%. And from a Sunnyvale standpoint, new construction, one of the things that we put in many years ago was a requirement for for sale multifamily like condos, always had 12.5% below market rate applied to affordable housing. Recently, last year, we put in place a similar thing for apartments. Now, some apartments, had their applications in before that went in, so it depends on the project. And city staff is following up with those developers to make sure that they're following the rules from the county. Now, keep in mind that some of them are, were in a transitionary state. They have, the city is allowing them a certain amount of time to shut down. So, if they've been digging holes, making sure that they're shored up correctly, putting things into a stable state is really important from a project standpoint, not just walking away. As we saw with our downtown, when the last downturn happened in 2008 and, the downtown project went into bankruptcy. While it was in bankruptcy, one of the big things was to close that up, making sure that windows were on the apartments that are now open and part of the City Line project. So part of that is there is a transitionary period while development actually has to be shorn up and shut down for those that aren't allowed anymore under the new orders. And then essential businesses were expanded to also include some things that had been left out of the previous one. Basic service providers that enable residential transactions. So, notaries, title companies, realtors, they're allowed to operate, so if people were in the process of selling or want to sell their homes, that is now allowed. Funeral homes and cemeteries weren't listed and now they're included. Moving companies are included. Rental car companies and rideshare services are also enabled essential activities. People, have a car issue. We previously the auto maintenance facilities were all open, but if somebody had a major car issue, they needed to rent a car, so those are now also included under this order. And essential businesses do need to look at scaling down their operations to only their essential components. So depending upon what those essential businesses are, it's definitely that they should be focusing on whatever's essential. Travel is still allowed within our county. One of the things that San Mateo County did was actually put a 5-mile limit for recreational distances. So you couldn't drive your car outside of the county. So if you're a San Mateo County resident, you're not allowed to basically drive to Rancho San Antonio to exercise. So there is that, there were some things that the county didn't do. That being said, who knows where we'll be in another week or two. But right now, people are allowed to travel to a park, to Baylands, to the Baylands Trail, things of that nature. That is allowed under our current order. But most importantly, essential services do continue. You can go to the grocery. The grocery stores are open. The farmers markets are allowed. Both of them are putting measures in place and reminders about what is safe social distancing. The Sunnyvale Farmers Market tomorrow, Saturday mornings, will actually have a senior hour for the first hour. So 9 to 10 a.m. Will be a senior hour. And so they're trying to focus and trying to do some of the same thing that the grocery stores are doing, Target and Zanotto's and all that, of either every day or certain days of the week having it for people that are at risk to specifically be shopping there. And Right now, from a update from a county, the number of tests that they're able to do has been increasing, and there are now a lot more ability to test. That being said, the county is not testing and doesn't have the capacity for testing anyone that is non-asymptomatic. So if you're not showing any symptoms, if you're not showing a fever, if you're not having the cough, all of that, the county doesn't want to test you, doesn't want to use its precious number of testing kits on people that aren't showing actual symptoms. So that's something to keep in mind. There's a really good county dashboard available right now that shows the number of symptoms, the number of people that have tested and been tested positive. All that's being tracked at a county level. I've reached out to try to get that at a city level, and currently we don't have that from a city standpoint. Okay, so that was from a county level on Tuesday midday. Tuesday evening, Sunnyvale City Council met for the first time, actually for the second time since the first order. And this was a very interesting meeting because this was the first time that we did video conferencing of all the council members. So at our meeting 2 weeks ago, we had a few council members, in the room on the dais doing safe social distancing. This last Tuesday night meeting, we had, all the council members via computer video. So it was an 8x8 system. It seemed to be a good first meeting with that. We're still working out some of the kinks, but I think it went over well. It was a relatively short agenda. A lot of things on the consent calendar that were just kind of standard city business that we went through. But the most important thing is we put an eviction moratorium in place for the city of Sunnyvale. And as I said last Friday, on March 24th, Santa Clara County supervisors declared an eviction moratorium for residential and commercial residents until May 31st for the entire county. But it had some things that we had our city staff and I directed them that we wanted to look at that. We had actually kicked that effort off before the county had put their measure in place, and so we continued forward with that item on our agenda. So from the county supervisors, they did residential and commercial, and there, from a county standpoint, residents had 120 days to pay all the rent that was due past May 31st. And then landlords were also barred from imposing late fees for unpaid rent if the tenant basically suffered financial hardship because of COVID-19. So when Sunnyvale took this under, Sunnyvale Council did something similar to the county eviction moratorium, but we did two things specific to us. One, we've only focused on eviction for residential, but we also included the mobile home community. So we wanted to make sure that people that are renting mobile homes, and in talking to the city attorney, the wording in the county measure didn't seem to be fully clear as far as that's concerned. So making sure that our mobile home community was protected was really important. And then, as opposed to 120 days after May 31st, and conceivably, the county could be extending that or changing that. But one of the things that we thought was important was, when people conceivably get a job at the end of this emergency, to 120 days conceivably isn't enough time for them to immediately pay back the back rent as well as their current rent. So what the city did was do 180-day time frame for paying back after the termination of a state emergency. So we wanted to tie it to the actual emergency as opposed to a specific date, mainly because conceivably that date keeps moving. The state of emergency, the state emergency is kind of ongoing, And so defining it to make sure that, whenever we finally, remove that we're in a state of emergency, that begins that actual clock. And so making sure that there's that flexibility, but making sure that we don't have to keep, what the county's been doing every few weeks, changing it because the conditions have changed from a time frame period. So that was the big thing that council did Tuesday night. And it went fairly well. We had a few, public comments, and right now we're only taking public written comments, and we're looking at trying to make sure that the public can actually call in and, be part of that system. We've seen, some that work well and then also work very poorly depending upon, what other cities have done. So we're evaluating it and making sure that it works best for us. I think that it was positive that people, were able to send in their comments real time during the meeting, which was then read by the city clerk. So I think it worked out fairly well for the first meeting that we've had under this, basically fully remote system by city staff and by the council members on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, another big announcement. Governor Newsom declared that schools would not open for the rest of the school year. And so, our local, elementary, middle, and high schools have already been working really hard to change to the remote learning model. And so it's actually been, it's had a few hiccups. Remote learning is difficult for the teachers, for the kids, for the parents to basically making sure that everything is working well. But things are starting to settle down. I think that, overall that program is looking fairly good. But it's not just the learning portion, and, children learn in different ways. And so that's an important, part of their daily, practice, how they're taking their lessons, how they're learning the material. But I think the biggest thing is children aren't getting the social interaction that schools provide. So they're no longer seeing or interacting with their friends on a daily basis, and that can be really difficult on them. It's the same thing as the adults sheltering at home. And so it's a very similar thing, except, school is a very social atmosphere for a lot of kids. And so, there aren't the outdoor sports there, there's a lot of things that, directly affect their daily lives. And so, I especially feel for the high school students who aren't getting that final year experience of high school. The schools are looking at how they're going to still do a graduation ceremony. Is it going to be pushed to later in the summer? But they're unsure about the time of when the state of emergency is going to be lifted. But there is that, that whole school experience that is being lost right now. And so, I really feel for the children in our community, but this is the best thing. It's the best way to spread, to stop the spread of the virus currently. And so, this is the order, and, it makes sense from a state standpoint. We are seeing positive effects on what we're doing, and it's, this is needed in as far as what we're currently doing. And then last night, Santa Clara County made announcements that all the residents should start wearing reusable is very important, non-medical face coverings when they're going outside of their home. So this is a slight change. This will prevent people from unintentionally spreading the virus if you have no symptoms. So this is really important. Medical masks, the N95s and surgical masks are in very short supply, and they should only be used for healthcare professionals, really, who need them in order to provide for and care for our community. When everybody wears a face covering, it also signals that we're protecting each other and reinforces that physical distancing of 6 feet. It also, reminds you that not to touch your face, or it's that sort of it's that constant reminder while you're out that we are doing the safe social distancing. If you are using, and hopefully most of you will be using, reusable masks, always wash your hands or use hand sanitizer before and after touching your face or the face covering. So, and most of the face coverings are washable, so having one or two and cycling between them is actually something very positive. Okay, let's see what's next. I have a few comments. Oh, one of the things that I talked about last week was Silicon Valley Strong. Santa Clara County officials unveiled Silicon Valley Strong last week. It's been really quick, or 2 weeks ago now. It's been a very quick effort trying to raise funding, food, volunteers, all to provide services countywide, as far as provide basic services for those that need from the COVID-19 crisis. So this was being done, in conjunction with a lot of different nonprofits. And, last week I talked about the first 11 million for that fund. So Sacred Heart Community Services was doing administration for that fund in conjunction with a countywide effort. In just 3 days, they had basically spent the whole $11 million. So they had processed, financial assistance requests from approximately 4,400, I think, requests. So it quickly exceeded the number of households that they could serve with that $11 million. And so since then, they've actually had another almost 5,000 households, I should say, also add their names looking for help. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing tomorrow is there's going to be a telethon. So just like the old Labor Day telethons, we're having a Bay Area telethon to help those extremely low income households. And from the first 4,400 applications, let's see, more than half of the applications were from residents that are in the extremely low income households. So they are earning $43,900 or less for a 4-person family. So these are people that are really in need, and often these are the people that have been hit hardest by COVID-19. These are restaurant workers. These are, workers at the high-tech companies that no longer have jobs because, either the restaurants have shut down or the high-tech companies are having everybody work remote and just have a skeleton crew as far as the cleaning crew. So Saturday's telethon will be live streamed on NBCBayArea.com and the NBC Bay Area Facebook page. So if you wish to help out, if you can contribute to this countywide effort, you can text SV Strong to 41444 to donate, or you can just go to siliconvalleystrong.org/telethon. And so, this is one of the many ways that you can help out, the county-wide. Definitely, Sunnyvale Community Services is always looking for donations too. So not to completely focus on Sunnyvale. The county overall is very important, but of course, I'm always focused as much as possible on Sunnyvale Community Services. So if you go to Sunnyvale Community Services website, you can basically donate money there, and they're always in need. They've been providing for hundreds of families from a food standpoint, on a weekly basis, so giving food to hundreds of families. And then they're also now providing financial assistance. One of the things that the City Council did 2 weeks ago was provide that $250,000 grant to Sunnyvale Community Services to help them also help out families that are been affected by COVID-19 from a rent standpoint, from a utility standpoint, whatever their needs are, making sure that those families in Sunnyvale are able to survive. So one of the standard questions I've been getting is, what is Sunnyvale doing in response to the coronavirus? So our essential services are completely operational. Workers and their functions have been modified to both keep employees safe and then kind of redistribute them to what's best from a city standpoint while we're in this shelter-in-place focus. So public safety, the good thing is we'd actually started looking at public safety staffing and their hours early on before the county order went in place. And we declared a local state of emergency before that order, making sure that we looked at staffing across the organization. So public safety is out there in our community. The utilities, we've adjusted shifts and limited access to facilities, but our utilities are still being provided. So your garbage is being picked up, every week. The water is still being delivered. The wastewater treatment plant is still processing our waste. So everything is fully operational. And I want to remind, as far as the water is concerned, the water is safe to drink for those people that are buying bottled water in the stores. That's really important from an earthquake standpoint, but as far as the virus is concerned, your water is safe to drink. And then, we're refocusing, we're reducing essential construction, or construction to only essential. So whatever the emergency residential is, wastewater, basically focused on, any infrastructure projects, bridges, or street work continue on. Making sure that our streets are safe is critical. But things like, non-essential activities are being shut down, and our workers are going out, our city staff are going out to make sure that that's actually happening. We've modified other services to comply with the public health orders. So we've closed the playgrounds previously, as was said, dog parks, skate parks, the tennis courts, the basketball courts. They all have chains and locks on them where that's able to be done, or yellow tape around them, reminding people that these are now they're now off limits during the latest orders. As far as the library, residents are able to get a library card to access online content. So contact the library if you need a card and didn't have one. But there's a full list of library online capabilities, from music, from videos, to a large number of audiobooks as well as ebooks that people can check out directly from the library. If you have a library book already out, you don't need to return it immediately. We've basically extended the deadlines for getting those back. So that's fine. We don't have the facility, we don't have the machinery at the library right now to fully, what I'll say is, treat any books, any materials coming in to provide, to make sure that there is no virus. So we're looking at that in the future, but right now we don't have that capability. And then, a lot of the library and recreational staff are doing online efforts. So, you see online story reading by our librarians. You also see a big effort for, like, the recreational staff creating ideas or having ideas to do interactive things for kids to do while they're at home. And then, maintaining the center source of city information. If you have any questions, go to sunnyvale.ca.gov/virus. And then the city manager is also doing a weekly update, so sending that out to the community, and you can see that online also. And then from a city standpoint, we're focusing on our most vulnerable community members. we proactively reached out by sending email to the thousands of members at our senior center to make sure that they were okay. And then we called, more than 400 seniors who don't have email to make sure, what are their needs. And then we've kind of apportioned city staff to not only deliver meals to seniors, but also pick up groceries, pick up medication, and deliver that. So, the city is trying to help out wherever they can. If you want to volunteer for that, there's a place on the city website to volunteer. And then, we're also working very closely with Sunnyvale Community Services. They're the ones that are dealing with, estimating the need and figuring out what people's needs are. But, it's city staff is also helping, doing some of the administration, some of the delivery, whatever we can do. It does take a community to get through this. And, Sunnyvale Community Services is doing a fantastic job. And we are, whatever we can do as far as that help them succeed is really important for everyone. And then we started a Sunnyvale Serves phone line for requests. So, if you have requests, you can call the city and ultimately figure out or do an Access Sunnyvale, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then in the last 2 weeks, we provided more than 700 meals to our seniors, and then the care managers continue to call back to our seniors to make sure that they're doing fine. One of the questions I keep getting is, what are our businesses doing? So I've been very proud of our local businesses. Google has been buying food from local restaurants and delivering it to the schools for distribution to kids in need. So, that's what Google has, and it's one of several companies that have been doing this. You might have heard about Cepheid. So Cepheid created the first on-demand test for COVID-19 that the FDA approved. And so that's, that was basically very important. We need to be able to test this. We need to be able to find a cure for the virus. But right now, that was one big step, and they were the first. So kudos to them. Maker Nexus. So there's a big maker community in the South Bay, and Maker Nexus is a maker spot in North Sunnyvale. And what they've been doing is making masks or making face shields for our hospital personnel. And they've made, I think, over 1,000 masks that they've distributed to different hospitals. And then last week, you probably heard last Sunday, the governor was in town. So governor was visiting Bloom Energy, and Bloom Energy used to be located in Sunnyvale. They're now in San Jose, but Bloom Energy is still has its manufacturing here. And one of the things that they're doing is refurbishing ventilators. So their manufacturing plant is still here in Sunnyvale, and that's been really important. Whatever businesses can do to help out during these trying times, it's really critical. And then as far as local restaurants and small businesses, it's really difficult for them. As you might see from my Facebook feed, I've been, going out on a daily basis. I never thought, mayor as restaurant critic would be part of my job, but please do whatever you can as far as doing takeout. I'm hearing each day about either restaurants that, can't maintain this because the number of takeout orders isn't enough to keep their doors open. So try to do that, and remember to always tip well. Businesses really are hurting. So Sunnyvale, from a city council standpoint, we'll be looking at a program to help small businesses in an upcoming council meeting. So sometime in the next month, we're looking at getting that funded. But there is a great need, and Sunnyvale has 95% of its businesses are less than 25 people. So that kind of shows that, Sunnyvale isn't just high-tech companies, it's a lot, and I really mean a lot of small companies. And so whatever we can do to help them is really important. One of the questions I always get is, what should I do during the pandemic? And as I've said before, Please only call 911 if you're having a life-threatening emergency. Don't panic, shelter in place, stay at home. The statewide, first countywide, now statewide order to shelter in place is critical, and it is showing results as far as the number of people that are being infected by the coronavirus. Please wash your hands, please practice safe social distancing, check in with your neighbors and make sure that they're okay. And, be kind and generous. You need to be patient, but as you're seeing people, as you're, whatever people you're interacting with, from a safe social distance, please be kind. The Bay Area, the state, the county are facing an enormous challenge right now. And I know we can all get through this, but it's going to take time. When you're out, seeing people on the street, wave to them, smile at them, say hi, from across the street. That social interaction, that's something that a lot of people are missing right now. And a smile can go a long way as far as improving somebody's day. I'm sheltering in place and at a high risk of contracting the virus. I need assistance for getting food or medication. What can I do? So if you need help related to the shelter in place, this is what whether or not it's picking up groceries or getting medication, you have several ways of doing that. One, you can access the Sunnyvale link. Access Sunnyvale is a link on the top of every city website. And so you can submit a request. You can also call the city at 408-730-7360 between 8:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. And city staff will respond as soon as it's possible. There are also several Nextdoor groups that I've actually been very positive about, hearing about them helping, their residents around the city and actually beyond the city borders to a certain degree. So you can check out Nextdoor also. What's the best way to stay up to date? So a lot of people have been asking that. The easiest thing you can do is go to the URL www.sunnyvale.ca.gov/virus, and that has all of our information. We keep updating that on a daily basis. There's answers to hopefully all of your questions, and if you don't have an answer there, definitely submit a question or submit a question to me. But there's places there to ask your questions also. Follow our social media. So, the City of Sunnyvale and Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety, they have Facebook pages, they have Twitter pages, they have Instagram accounts that are putting this information out there on how things are changing, as well as, what people can do, what people should be doing, and what people can do during the virus. And then you can also see updates on Nextdoor. I don't visit Nextdoor as often as I probably should, but there's also updates there. You can follow my Facebook page and Instagram account. I pare it down. I try to pare it down to kind of the big important, items that are coming out in our community, the big changes from an order standpoint. And so people can, keep following my information. I try to make sure that people are up to date on what's going on. Somebody's asked, I want to help. What can I do? So there's multiple ways that you can help. There's the Senior Warriors for Project Joy. It's a Facebook group that's doing, a delivery as well as kind of a mental health discussion. So making sure that people have a way to communicate with each other, making sure that people are being checked in on. There are several Nextdoor groups that I mentioned that have been created to deliver food, to deliver medication, so there's a lot of different things there. Let's see. You can volunteer at Sunnyvale Community Services. So if you want to, volunteer there. So go to their volunteer tab, and they're always taking volunteers. And if you're in good health, please consider giving blood. Blood supplies are low. I gave to the Red Cross about a week ago, and that they were overjoyed by that. They definitely, there's a need, and because people are sheltering in place, if you're in good health, contact them, schedule an appointment. They're only doing, they're not doing simple drop-ins. All their mobile blood bank blood drives are now being canceled because of the COVID-19 shelter in place, and so only the main Red Cross offices that normally are permanently located are taking blood donations right now. But definitely consider donating to them if you're in good health. I'm very proud of our maker community. That was, which I mentioned earlier. Maker Nexus, creating face shields for all those hospital professionals that are on the front lines. It's really important. And then neighborhood groups have been sewing masks. So, I had several masks dropped off yesterday. I was very impressed. And this is right now, it's a time for everyone to help everyone else. Somebody reached out as far as, there were groups, professionally sewing to a large degree masks, but they didn't have the elastic. They were out of elastic, and so I reached out to several members of our community and finally found somebody that had 75 feet of elastic that was able to contribute to this effort. So it's everyone helping everyone else right now. We're all in this together, and this is a perfect example of that. I think that this is a fantastic idea. Whatever you can do to help your neighbors, is it sharing, you baked a loaf of bread, share that with your neighbors. But it's really important that we do whatever we can for everyone else. And I'll put the call back out there that if you have elastic that you would be willing to donate to this effort, reach out to me. There's at least 2 different groups that are creating these face masks, and both of them have the same need. Okay, so that was the majority of what I had. I had some questions that came in while I've been talking. One of the questions I had is, when will is Whole Foods still opening this month? And I'm sorry to say, no, Whole Foods is not opening until later in the summer. And one of the things was, it was still, they were behind AMC. So the big thing was AMC Theaters was shooting, and I didn't mention this last week, but they were shooting to open March 31st. So that was their goal. They were on track for that. And then, the shutdown started, the virus hit, and right now AMC has closed all of its doors for all of its theaters around the US. And so, for good or bad, I wish it was open. That being said, it could have opened and immediately closed. And so I think we'll have, even a bigger fanfare when our AMC finally opens. Whole Foods was not going to be opening until the end of May. But all that construction, all the internal work that was happening inside of the Whole Foods to get it ready has stopped while the shelter in place is happening. So, that isn't, available and not moving forward. Are all city services running, like Public Works? Yes. The essential city services are running. One of the things that I did want to bring up is the special dump days at the Smart Station were canceled last weekend and this weekend. That being said, if you have, a lot of people are doing spring cleaning right now while they're at home. If you have things that you need to basically dump, turn into the dump, you can have a special pickup, so you can call the city and have special pickup done. And we talked about, will wearing masks while out of the house become mandatory? I don't think so. I think it's going to be a recommendation. There's also the concept of, well, if people didn't have a mask, it's like, but need to go out for essential services, you can't basically say, well, stay at home. Conceivably we might get there, but that's one of the reasons why everyone needs a mask, and having enough. Not everybody has a mask available, so I think it's a recommendation, and I don't know if the county will ever get to a mandatory state, but that is critical. If people have extra masks, definitely consider donating them to the hospital, to public safety. I'm going to be picking up some masks that people donated, that they basically ordered before, or when this started, that just came in. They donated a lot to the hospitals, and I'm basically accepting some for the city, because we have a continuous need as we're dealing with food delivery, delivering meals to our seniors, delivering medication. It is really important that the city does have that capability. I'm a local plumbing contractor. A residential new construction job shut down. Yes, all residential construction is shut down. That being said, if you have, what are exempted are basically electricians, plumbers, anything that needs to do with home maintenance, that does need to go on. So those businesses, whether or not it's exterminator or plumber, electrician, they are allowed under the county order. Are pool and spa maintenance jobs considered essential? That I don't know. I know that there was the concept of essential like gardening, not basically prettying up the yard, but if there's tree trimming that's required or things of that nature, that's allowed to go on underneath the latest orders. Our police and fire department, how are they doing? Well, so I've been talking to the chief of police, obviously, but I've been out and I've talked to several several of our public safety officers. Calls are down. So overall, the amount, not having a lot of people driving around, not having a lot of cars on the road has definitely dropped the number of accidents that occur. Most people are at home, so the number of fires and other things, that happen while people conceivably are out of the house aren't happening. So from that standpoint, things are down. That being said, there does seem to be a general uptick as the sun goes down and people start worrying about that cough, or worrying about, are they sick? So there is some of that, but definitely they're handling this like everyone else. They're wearing their full gear when they're out, even shopping, shopping at the grocery, all their interactions to make sure that they don't get sick, which is really critical. We saw what happened in San Jose. A lot of their first fire department, and I heard recently some of their public safety or some of their police department have also been hit by the coronavirus. Let's see. Are small home-based daycares allowed to stay open? So yes, senior care, daycare are still allowed. And parents who work from home are allowed to take their children there. So conceivably, trying to get the kid out of the house, all the operations, they need to have appropriate measures in place for the kids. That being said, a lot of them are limiting, the number of kids that they have in their daycare to a set few, but it depends on the daycare. A lot of them have actually closed because they either had a rotating number of kids that conceivably, if they keep mixing up those kids, there's conceivably cross contamination as far as the virus is concerned. Let's see what else is happening. Yeah, the Saturday's farmers market is still open, so I did confirm that. Definitely, it's important that we continue to buy our food there if you can. The farmers, they don't have a stream to deliver those the produce that they're creating, they don't have a stream to deliver that to a Safeway, a Lucky's store. And so it's really important that you go and support them as much as possible. Is the downtown Sunnyvale apartment construction happening during the pandemic? So yes, because City Line, 12.5% of the new apartment building that's being built at Iowa and TAFE, because 12.5% is affordable, so basically dedicated to low-income residents or low-income people that qualify and ultimately put into those apartments. Because of that, that construction is allowed to go on. So any affordable housing that's being built is still considered an essential from a city standpoint. The Orchard Supply hardware store and Toys R Us have been empty for some time. Could they be used to shelter the homeless, many of whom are working at low-paid jobs and living in their cars? So definitely, I've been dealing with the county and looking for different locations. It depends on the developer. Right now, the county has several locations that they're looking at to expand for the homeless and those people that are living in cars. Heard on the local news that everyone should be wearing masks, and we already talked about that. We got a wave. Oh, that's pretty interesting. A wave from Iska, our sister city. So it's actually that's really impressive. It's like, so we're reaching not just beyond Sunnyvale borders here, but beyond the U.S. borders to our sister city in Iska, Japan. So really happy to have you here, and I'm concerned about some of the local churches are still gathering, even though it's 10 or so people. Most of them are streaming their services, and conceivably they have a minimum staff to set up this stream. I visited 3 or 4 different churches last Sunday during their services because it's so much easier as opposed to actually going out and visiting the church. It's still a positive way to actually find out what's happening in a community, and the churches are doing it slightly different ways, but I think it's still important, and and the churches know that they need to have appropriate measures in place to maintain that social distancing while they're there, and they're not doing full congregations. That's one of the reasons why they're going to a live stream. So with that, it is 10 a.m. and I need to wrap up. I just want to thank everyone again for joining me today. I hope that these are useful for everyone. Please email me or add something to the comments if you had a question, if you had an idea, if you have something to donate that would help someone else in our community. It is really important that we work together. The pandemic puts everything in perspective. I've seen so many Sunnyvale residents come together to help those in need however they can. And yes, it's not as easy doing it through social media, through online endeavors. That being said, we're doing very well. I'm very happy to and I'm really proud about what I've seen so far. If you're out, on a walk, please smile, wave, say hi to somebody at a safe social distance. People miss, that interaction, and I'm hoping, these addresses, these weekly addresses, and I understand it's not fully interactive. I'm not hearing anybody's voices, but I hope that makes a difference. And ultimately, we will emerge from this pandemic as a stronger community. I think it's troubling times, especially from an economic standpoint. But I've seen a lot of good happening, and we're all in this together. We'll get through this together, and I just want to thank you for listening, and until next week, thank you very much. Have a great week. Bye.